Penn State fans, it's Blue-White breakdown time here on PennLive, PennLive's Penn State football podcast. I'm Bob Flounders, joined as always early in the week by Johnny McGonigal. Spring's in the books, Johnny. We had an interesting experience outdoors watching Penn State's Blue-White game with the ongoing Beaver Stadium $700 million renovation. It was a little bit windy, but we played through, saw some interesting things. I just wonder how many Penn State fans, Johnny, because there weren't that many there and it wasn't on TV. I just wonder if they're probably dying for Penn State updates. And that's, I think, what we're here to do. We're also going to preview another podcast halfway through the show. Make sure you're ready for that. I'm looking forward to that, Johnny. But we got to talk about the spring game. But even more important, Johnny, we got to talk about the new wideout on Penn State's roster, because it is more important than the spring game. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, it was the biggest news piece from Saturday, Bob, and we had the Blue-White game ahead of us still when Trebor Pena announced that he was committing to Penn State. Syracuse wide receiver out of the spring transfer portal, arguably the top receiver in the portal. He was considering other options as well. There were reports that he was visiting Miami, UCLA, USC, but he had visited Penn State the weekend before the Blue-White game and clearly liked what he heard. From James Franklin, maybe Drew Aller, Andy Kotelnicki, Penn State needed a wide receiver in this spring transfer portal. They wanted a wide receiver in this portal window, and they come away with Pena, who was Syracuse's top receiving option last year. And in any other year, that doesn't sound all that impressive. But when you consider Syracuse threw the ball more than most teams did last year, Kyle McCord was their quarterback.
Yeah.
I mean, they were a true pass first team, and Pena was the main guy. You look at the stats, 84 catches, 941 yards, 9 touchdowns. And so that's on top of Devonte Ross, who had over 1,000 yards last year for Troy. That's on top of Kyron Hudson from USC, really, a veteran guy. And those two, Ross and Hudson, I thought did some good things on Saturday in the Blue-White game. So it was a big day for the wide receivers.
Yeah, it was. And I would just say this. Pat Kraft said it in his press conference, in the winter about the need to get a wideout. And when he said that, like, if there was going to be one that they liked, you knew they were going to take a big swing. I think he got a credit, not just James and his staff, but also pooling together the financial resources to get this done. Because look, when you have a team that is mostly complete, like Penn State, with only a couple of question marks, and you bring back all that veteran talent to really go all in, and there's one really kind of glaring issue, you got to do everything in your power, Johnny, to address that issue and to add 3 portal wideouts, different kinds of all 3 are pretty much different types of players. It was not an easy task. It was a heavy lift. I think I think, Johnny, they're giving it their best shot. Like, it remains to be seen what the impact will be, but they did not stand pat, right? A couple of receivers left. They knew what they had to do. They still got to replace 104 catches from Tyler Warren, who's now an Indianapolis Colt. But I think you have to commend Penn State for putting their best face forward, their best foot forward. And I mean, they added 3 guys. They're all different, and they're worth about, I don't know, over 2,000 receiving yards. So it's going to be fascinating to see how quickly all of this comes together.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how the offseason started for Penn State, just days after that loss in the Orange Bowl to Notre Dame. They retained Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, Zaki Wheatley, Drew Aller reaffirmed that he was coming back. So, you look at what Ohio State did last offseason, and their player retention was really the biggest driver for them to go and win the national title. That was a huge deal for Penn State to be able to bring back the foundation of the team that took you to the CFP semifinals. Obviously, you lose Abdul and you lose Tyler, but to bring back those guys at that moment was huge. And going into the winter, going into the spring, knowing that you needed to address the wide receiver position and doing so by bringing in 3 guys, like you mentioned, Bob, different kinds of players, but all productive at their previous stops. There's just a really good job by the coaching staff, by everyone behind the scenes, to give this team that has a chance to win the national title in 2025, or at least make another CFP run and get to the national title game. to give that program and give that team and give those players the best chance to be successful. And more specifically, Drew Aller, who, he is the guy who you've tied your program to, the 5-star recruit who is now entering his third year as a starting quarterback, and losing a player like Tyler Warren. You need to give him the best chance to succeed, and the best chance to thrive. And Pena is just the latest in an effort to do that.
Yeah. And I also would say this, just talking to some Penn State players, as much as they're going to miss Tyler Warren, and you just can't say enough good things about him, the Colts getting him at 14, I think really, if he takes another step forward, John, I think, people don't think of a tight end as somebody who can really move the needle, but this is not a typical tight end they're getting. They're getting a weapon who can just really impact the game on and off the field for that program. But what my point is, I do think that Penn State's tight end room is still pretty solid. Khalil Dinkins, I think really took a big step forward last year. It was maybe hard to notice it because you look at his catching numbers, but he's a pretty complete tight end now. He can help him in the run game. But I'm even more excited about Luke Reynolds, who I think was banged up there at the end of spring drills. I don't think it's serious. And when you look at him, he looks like he is going to take a huge step. And you combine those with the running game, with the offensive line, with an experienced quarterback. There's a lot of nice pieces. It's really it's funny, Johnny, because it's really, to me, they have some good defensive players, but I think one of my takeaways from Penn State spring drills is they have some very young, exciting talent on the defensive side, and they have some quality veterans. But it could really hinge on how quickly they can build and trust their defensive depth up front, at linebacker, and I think even at safety. King Mack, I think, was dinged up. We saw 2 of their 3 safeties, but it's just kind of funny how this team's coming together. They have a lot of top-end talent. They have a lot of veteran talent, but there's just still a couple more spots, though. I think that you like the way they develop their players and how quickly they develop them, but they still are going to have to develop. They're still going to have to do it again.
Yeah, on the offensive side of the ball, addressing wide receiver in the portal was massive. On the other side of the ball now, I think there's still some work to be done. I know that the spring portal is closed for undergraduate players to enter. But
Mm-hmm.
anyone who's in the portal right now, like, it's not like they needed to find a team by the time the portal closed. Like, they got time to figure out where they want to go. And I say that because Tamir Robinson left to USC at linebacker, which was a bit of a surprise. And James Franklin, talked about it in his post Blue-White game press conference, and we talked about it on our video when we were fighting the wind out there at Beaver Stadium. But a little bit more on that. I mean, James basically had an open plea. He's saying if there's a linebacker out there that wants to come play at LBU and all that, they've got their eyes on a couple linebackers who are in the portal right now. So that's an area that I'm sure they would love to address from a depth standpoint, from a competing for rep standpoint. It's going to be a lot of 4-2-5 defense with Jim Knowles, but behind or working in tandem with Tony Rojas and Dom DeLuca, and then some of the younger guys in that room, they can certainly use some more talent at linebacker. But defensive line as well, like, there's obviously that balance, right? Of, like, you have your foundation, but you need guys to step up. That's how every team is in the country right now as we look towards May, and then those summer workouts and ultimately training camp. But yeah, guys are gonna have to step up, but I think they're confident in the talent and they have overall in the program.
Yeah, and just real quick, just to circle back, it was kind of a reveal in James's post spring blue white game presser. He basically said that kind of caught them by surprise because he had said shortly before the portal was about to open, he didn't want any surprises, and he left me with the impression that they pretty much had an idea. JB Nelson had already left. He had announced his intentions. I think that he was going to leave. He had an idea of who they were probably going to lose, but I don't know that a healthy Tamir, was kind of on his list. And if he is healthy in 2025, I think they were really kind of counting on him, as a top 4, top 5 linebacker. And even if they're only going to play 2, I mean, you got to have more than 3 or 4 that you can trust. And you wonder how quickly they're going to act. But he did basically, it was almost like a recruiting pitch. He basically said at his press conference, that, we kind of need a linebacker. So if you ever thought about coming to linebacker U, now's the time to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly how he phrased it. And like I said, there's a guy or two out there that they're looking at. And so yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's another addition via the portal. Something to keep in mind too, and something that James touched on as we talk about the portal and the roster. Talk about the roster math because you have the settlement, the NCAA settlement that's going on right now. A big
Hmm.
question is like, is the roster going to have to reduce to 105 players? Are the current rosters going to be grandfathered in with all of this? And it's sounding like more and more that the current rosters will be grandfathered in, and so they're not going to have to go cut crazy on walk-ons and maybe even a scholarship player or two. And so that's a good sign if you're Penn State because you know how much they value their walk-on system. I mean, Dom DeLuca
Yeah.
is the latest example of a guy who came on as a walk-on and grabbed a role. But the roster math right now is it's a little blurry because we don't know exactly what the limit is going to be for the upcoming season, but it's trending in a positive direction for Penn State.
I agree, Johnny. And we're going to get to some of our other thoughts. There's a lot to get to just with what we saw during the spring game. And it's important, right? Because the game wasn't on TV. There wasn't really a big crowd. It was about 35-mile-an-hour winds where we were sitting. So I understand why maybe some people were going to tailgate and maybe not come in. But I think that fans kind of want to hear about what we thought. We're going to get to that here on the Blue White Breakdown. It's Monday, April 28th. Spring drills have concluded. We're going to get to some of our thoughts. But guys, I just want you to know if you're enjoying this Blue White Breakdown, there's another podcast out there that I really think you need to check out. And I have some details. When Lamont Jones learns his young cousin died in custody just weeks after entering prison, his world shatters. The official report claims natural causes, but how does that explain the bruises covering his body, the missing teeth? As grief transforms and becomes into frustration, Lamont faces an impossible choice: accept the story he's been told or risk everything to uncover the truth about what happened to his cousin. From Wondery comes Death County, PA, a chilling true story of corruption, cover ups, and one man's relentless pursuit of justice. What begins as one man's search for answers soon reveals a pattern too disturbing to ignore. Lamont's cousin's death is just one of many in Dauphin County Prison, and powerful forces are working to keep the truth buried. Through never before heard interviews with whistleblowers and shocking revelations, Death County, PA pulls back the curtain on one of America's darkest institutional secrets. Hosted by award-winning journalist Joshua Vaughn, Death County, PA follows Lamont's journey as he exposes a web of suspicious deaths, institutional cover-ups, and confronts a reality TV coroner who claims to speak for the dead. This isn't just another true crime story. It's happening right now, and the fight for justice is far from over. Binge all episodes of Death County, PA early and ad-free on Wondery Plus. Start your free trial in the Wondery app, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. All right, we're back to talk some Penn State football, some spring drills, what we saw. Bob Flounders here with Johnny McGonigal. Johnny, there was one player I really want to talk about, but when we were talking on our post-game video, I thought you brought up a really good point, and James Franklin kind of alluded to it, in the post-game. And you kind of overlook it because we're talking about Drew Aller, and he's got to stay healthy. Maybe the key player on the team, yet the quarterback always is. But we kind of saw, and it was only spring drills, but I have to say Jaxon Smolik I thought was a pleasant surprise. Not the whole thing wasn't full contact. He wasn't allowed to get hit, but he made some plays. He made a big touchdown throw to Lyric Samuel in the game, adverse conditions, and James said afterward, I think a lot of us, I think you and me included, thought that maybe Ethan Grunkmeyer was going to be the guy for sure. James said not so fast. And after what I saw, I know it was only one practice, but I really can't disagree with him. I didn't know, Jaxon was hurt last year, but he looked pretty comfortable out there. He moves very well. He's not the classic quarterback in terms of maybe build or arm strength, but James has really talked him up ever since he's gotten here. And I don't think he was blowing smoke. That was a pretty impressive showing, and I think you agree.
Yeah, Bobby, you mentioned that, with the tackling and like the nature of the spring game, it's not like, Jackson Smolik was going to get lit up. But he was running for his life on one play, running away to his left, throwing off his back foot a 40-yard dime to Lyric Samuel for that touchdown. But that wasn't just the only throw that he made. I thought he got into a rhythm really well. Ethan Grunkmeyer did too, but it was nice to see it from Jaxon, who missed all of last season with that injury. And we know how important the backup quarterback position is everywhere, but especially at Penn State in recent years, we've seen it. Like Bo Prabula had to come in. He had to play against Rutgers a couple of years ago. He had to come in and win the game against Wisconsin. In the second half last fall at Camp Randall when Drew Aller got hurt. We saw what happened out at Iowa a few years ago when the backup wasn't prepared for that moment. And so we know how important having a capable backup is, and how important it is to have those players ready, whoever that is. I thought going into spring, it was almost like a given
Yeah.
that it would be Ethan Grunkemeyer. I mean, the way that he stepped up from a mental standpoint, preparing to be the backup to Drew during the CFP after Bo left right before the CFP started. You talk to teammates, you talk to coaches. Grunkmeyer, a 2024 signee who comes in, came into Penn State with all the recruiting accolades you could possibly want, and has handled himself great, ever since coming in. And so he just kind of seemed like the natural guy who would be, he'll be Drew's backup, and then he'll probably start for the team in 2026.
Hmm.
Smolik coming off that injury, not having any rust at all during spring camp. I mean, it's great for him, and it's great to have competition behind Drew. And even talking to Drew after the blue and white game, I asked him about those two guys. He said, "Look, they're obviously pushing each other, but they're also making me better too. Their competition is making me better, making me up my game." So it's a really positive thing going on right now in Penn State's quarterback room, led by Danny O'Brien, the quarterbacks coach, and Trace, his assistant, and something to monitor because we're not going to have an answer on who this backup quarterback is,
Right.
probably until September, like early September, because James said that it looks like it's going to go to the wire, and I don't blame him on that.
Yeah, so if you're Jackson, you're encouraged, right? You hear the coach say that, and if you're Grunkemeyer and you're a competitor, probably needed to hear that and say, "Look, man, the fight's not over. I can be better," and it could be a win-win for both those guys. But um, I was a little surprised by considering he had a long layoff. I was surprised by how good he looked, and he moved around nicely in the pocket. He is not the biggest quarterback, but you know what? There's Trace McSorley wasn't the biggest quarterback either, and he was a guy that really his legs were an asset. I'm not saying this guy's Trace McSorley as a runner, but the mobility, it was kind of refreshing to see. They couldn't hit him, so that's another bridge he's going to have to cross. But the other thing, Johnny, is we got to see two of the three transfer wideouts. I know it was not an extended look, but we did get to see Devonte Ross. We did get to see Kyron Hudson. They were targeted quite a bit by the quarterbacks. Again, it was only a scrimmage, but it was good to see them kind of out there. They're different body types. They're going to have different roles, and I still think they're like James said. They're going to need the summer to kind of get even more on the same page with Drew because that's not an easy thing to develop a rapport. Sometimes it takes years. You look at some of Penn State's wideouts, like a Jahan Dotson, some of the really good ones, even KJ Hamler. It takes a little while to kind of the quarterback's going to know where you're going to be. You're going to know what the quarterback's thinking, whether it's a site, all that stuff's important. So I do think it was good to see them, but I don't think their work's done by any task at all. I think they have a little bit more to do, and James talked about that. The summer's going to be important. He says it every year, but when you add 3 transfer portal wideouts, I think it's even bigger summer for Penn State.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge summer for Drew Aller leading a lot of those player-led workouts before August training camp rolls around. And talk about the wide receivers that we saw on Saturday. Pena was on the sidelines, watching, his future offense, what he's going to be playing in a matter of weeks or months when he ultimately enrolls, in the summer. But Ross and Hudson, I was really impressed by. I was impressed by both of them. Hudson, he's a bigger body. We know he's a contested catch guy, 6'1". I think he's around 212,
Yeah, he's a
215
solid kid.
solid kid, and you saw early. running a couple of out routes when he had one-on-one coverage, and he just kind of boxed this guy out and made the catch and got out of bounds. Like Penn State could use that. They could certainly use that. Just an easy guy to throw to and move the chains.
Yeah.
Ross, like using him throughout the offense and kind of lining him up in a lot of different places. Um, a couple of jet sweeps, using his speed. There was a play early before the thud tackling, before the live tackling even started. It was a 7-on-7 session that we saw, and he beat his guy off the line of scrimmage easy. And it was a deep route, and Drew overthrew him by like a foot or two. But Ross's speed, he's a guy who can stretch the field and catch a 60-yard touchdown for you. So you add Pena into the mix there. I think those three wide receivers, I'd be surprised if, I was going to say, I'd be surprised if they're not your three starting wide receivers for this upcoming season. Bringing
Yeah.
those three guys in, I think that's the intent. You have Liam Clifford, you have Caden Saunders, you have younger players. Like I liked what I saw from Tyseer Denmark
Yeah.
quite a bit,
Yeah.
catching passes from Ethan Grunkmeyer. But you don't bring in those three guys if you don't intend to use them. And so I was impressed by what Ross and Hudson did, and I'm sure we'll be impressed by what Pena does when we see him.
Yeah, and I do think even though Tyler's moved on, I think a two tight end set with Dinkins and Luke Reynolds too is going to be a go-to alignment for Penn State as well. But yeah, to your point, you don't spend the money to bring these guys in, and then you're just going to when they want to spread the field, it's probably going to be a lot. I think Denmark is good, by the way, but I do think those three are going to be predominantly. They should be if they're healthy. The three wideouts. Johnny, as we move along here, you know I think it was a running clock. The game, thank goodness, moved very quickly. The first half, there really wasn't any hitting of note. It was kind of thud where you just kind of wrap the guy up, you don't bring him to the ground. But they did go live, other than the quarterbacks, in the second half, and there was more contact. The biggest hit for me, I mean, I think we're going to agree on this. It was certainly the loudest hit. I was very impressed with the true freshman corner, Darius Dixon. And it wasn't just that big hit he had. I think it was on Josiah Brown, and credit Josiah for holding on to the ball. But I thought he was very good in coverage. I think he took the ball away from Devonte Ross. It looked like it was going to be a catch on one play. He did not at any stage of this game look or act like a true freshman. Physically, he is built to be a freshman who can play right away. And you wonder why John Mitchell might have decided to get out of Penn State in the portal, because I think they liked him too. I think this kid is on the fast track, and if he has a good August camp, when they're in extra DB sets, I have to think that Jim Knowles is going to want to get this guy. He's a bigger corner on the field. He wasn't shy about being in coverage. He hit that. That was a pretty big hit, but I was just really impressed maybe by how he actually covered the receivers too.
Yeah, Bob, you mentioned, the format of the game, running clock. We didn't have any, there were no official stats being kept. Penn State in the past did that. So like from a production and all that kind of stuff, like it was tough to follow a little bit, but and even the replays in stadium weren't really reliable. So
No.
before a given play, you kind of have to lock in on a guy or two and just, whatever happens else happens. Dixon, my eyes gravitated towards him quite a bit.
Yeah.
I was really impressed by him. And you mentioned the corner room.
Yeah.
AJ Harris is a guy who could emerge as like a Joey Porter type shutdown
Yeah.
corner, I think, this upcoming season, and possibly be off to the NFL in the 2026
Mm-hmm.
draft. You look at Elliott Washington and the offseason that he's had so far. I mean, he's been the buzziest name of all buzzy names, coming out of spring camp, and has all the talent to fulfill that. You look at Zion Tracy, you look at Eldavian Collins. Like this is a veteran laden corner room that Terry Smith has to work with. And like you mentioned, John Mitchell, the redshirt freshman, transferring out to Georgia Tech. Like there was a reason why. He saw the writing on the wall. The playing time probably wasn't going to be there. But also when you see a guy like Darius Dixon making plays like that, because I'm sure that wasn't the first time he was playing that way
No.
on Saturday. That's a player that you get excited about for the future, but also in the short term, like you mentioned, getting a guy like that on the field, maybe even if it's just special teams and then some sub packages, just getting him a taste because, like I mentioned, Harris could be gone. Some of these corners could be gone after next season, and getting a guy like that ready for what's to come in the years in the future, in the near future, is really important. So I liked what I saw from him. Not necessarily surprised. I mean, he was, depending on what recruiting outlet you look at. I mean, he was, it was
Top
him or
guy.
Andrew Olesh, the tight end, as the top guys in Penn State's 2025 recruiting class.
Yeah, and he's definitely the one that's more ready. I mean, Olesh is going to have to get bigger. This guy doesn't need to get any bigger. He's already got great instincts. He's the athleticism, the size. That's literally he is the if you look at the physical type, and you mentioned Joey Porter and you mentioned AJ Harris, who's also the physical type. That's what James Franklin wants. He wants corners that can deal with bigger wide receivers, but they're also quick enough to handle the quicker guys too. But I was impressed with him. There's two other names I wanted to bring up, but I wanted to get. Were there a couple players that you wanted to talk about? Maybe we might agree on this as we kind of wrap up this podcast because, like we said, this is a little bit of a different blue-white game. I don't know how many of the fans that are watching this or listening actually really kind of, if you weren't at the game, you really didn't get to see kind of what we saw. So, Johnny, a couple other you mentioned Tyseer. Is there a couple other young kids you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, two off the top of my head here. Sticking at wide receiver, and we mentioned him earlier in the podcast, but Lyric Samuel, I thought
Yeah.
impressed. I mean, 6'4". He's got some growing to do in terms of filling out his body. He's a true freshman, early enrollee. But if you're looking for a guy who might surprise, in terms of moving up the depth chart at wide receiver for this season and even into next, he's one to keep an eye on. Even beyond the 40-yard touchdown catch that he had a little early on. He had a little button hook that Grunkmeyer fit into a tight window. He
Mhm.
caught it, turned upfield, made a guy miss, and continued on. And it's just little things like that seeing it from a freshman is pretty impressive. Max Granville is a player that we've talked about quite a bit since he reclassified before last season, joined the team a couple days, weeks before the season started, and ultimately got himself a role last year. There was one rep that he beat Drew Shelton on, and he wrapped all the way around to chase down Drew Aller on the other side. And of course, he didn't bring him down because you can't hit Drew, you can't hit the quarterbacks in the blue-white game, but he would have. He would have brought him down. And so Max Granville, just a small snapshot of a player that we know is super talented, and once again, kind of showing that. So we know Abdul is gone, Amin Vanover, Smith Filbert gone. Opposite tonight, Dennis Sutton, there's an open spot. And Zariah Fisher could fall in there, and I would expect him, if he doesn't start, to have a really big role for this team. The same with Max Granville, a second-year player.
Yeah. Two for me. We're talking about the linebackers, and we're talking about it's pretty clear that if they get the chance and it's a good fit, that's the word that James Franklin always likes to use, right? They're going to bring in a linebacker with some playing experience just to feel, to help the defense now, but also to feel better about the depth because they do have a lot of guys. Once you get past, with Tamir moving on, once you get past, Tony Rojas, who was very limited, I mean, completely limited in spring as he recovers from an undisclosed injury, even though we know what the injury is. And Dom DeLuca, it's they just have some guys they just don't have enough experience. So, but for me, I wanted to just mention Anthony Specca, who I thought, he played a lot with the blue team. There in the second half when they went live, they were short a couple linebackers. I've heard nothing but good things about him, whether it's from Dan Connor or some of his teammates. Whether or not they bring a linebacker in, I think they feel really good about where Specca is. He wasn't a January enrollee as a freshman. He got there a little bit late. I think this spring was really big for him so he could get on the same page, not only with Dan Connor, but also the new DC, Jim Knowles. I think you're going to see him really move forward, coming off of his redshirt year. The other guy, and I know he's a freshman, and I know people are going to overreact. I just want to say LeVar Arrington, the freshman, the son of Penn State royalty. You can just see the way that he moves and how effortlessly he moves. He moves like a big athlete, much like his dad. He's not his dad's size yet. He's getting there. I mean, they list him at 212. Maybe by the time August rolls around, if he can get into the 220 range. But just watching him move out there, he makes it look easy. He's a sideline to sideline guy. We've seen clips of him. Penn State put it out on their spring account of him kind of rushing the passer already and being a blitzer. But I just think the more he gets comfortable, I think that it's a huge ceiling that he's got, and the talent is very considerable. He got his hands on a Drew Aller pass, I think, early in the first half. I think it was the first half, but he almost had an interception. I'm not saying it's this year, but I feel like a year from now, we could really be talking a lot about LeVar's son, LeVar Arrington. He's a specimen, and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, I think.
Absolutely. This is what the blue-white game is for, right, Bob? Obviously, if you're a fan and you went there, or in the past when they had televised it, like, you want to see Drew Aller, you want to see Singleton, Catron, but in reality, we're taking notes and we're watching the guys who are getting the most reps, and those are the younger guys. So guys like LeVar the second, guys like Darius Dixon, Lyric Samuel, Specca, who I talked to Specca afterwards, and when he was talking about how when Tamir left in the portal and went to USC, that he kind of felt like, okay, like I got to step up a little bit here and be more of a leader, and talk more, and take an elevated role in the linebacker room. And that's something that Dan Connor empowered him to do, which, by the way, all accounts, like, talking to the linebackers throughout spring, this is the first year that Dan Connor is officially the linebackers coach of this room. He basically was last year when Tom Allen was the defensive coordinator, but all positive things with Dan Connor so far. And so when we look at this linebacker room, we look at Specca and the guys in the room, the guys that they lost, the guys they may bring in, know that Dan Connor has this thing under good control. So yeah, it was a positive, I think, a positive experience despite the win, despite what
I'm
we
just
had.
happy we survived the win. We were, you know what?
It's brutal.
I don't want to mention any names, Penn State fans, but not everyone in the media braved the conditions to bring you the details that Johnny and I just. A couple of them went downstairs to the warm confines of the interview room to kind of watch the game, but there were a couple brave soldiers that kind of, it was a pretty good vantage point. It was cold, but yeah, it was a blue-white game experience unlike any other I've had, and unlike any other you've had. Hopefully next year we won't have to do it. But I just want to say we sucked it up, and we were there to give you these kinds of details. And I don't know that everyone saw what we saw.
Bob, what were your thoughts on just Beaver Stadium, the way it looked, like without the press box
It
there,
was
the
weird.
construction? It's just weird, right?
And now you know, and that what I was thinking as we walked by, because there was a lot of there's Joe Herman's taking some great photos of the renovation. My overriding thought is now I know why they said it's going to take 3 years. This is a huge building, and there's so much work to get to, and it's significant, substantial work that it's just there's no way it was going to happen overnight. But it's been what? It's been 4 months or 3.5 months since the stadium felling, and progress has been made on the renovation, but they're still pretty much a long ways away. And Johnny, I'm with you. I kept looking over where the old press box was, and I just can't believe it's. I still can't believe it's gone. And I'm like, I sat there for like 22 years, and there's like no traces of it. And you just wonder. I know I'm not sure quite where we're going to be in the fall, but I can respect. Now I know why it's $700 million, and now I know why it's going to take 3 years, because it is a huge undertaking.
Yeah, it's going to be a really busy summer in State College on those renovations. Hopefully, the weather stays well for all those construction workers, because it's going to be a lot. But it was really interesting, just kind of walking around Beaver Stadium, just sitting where we were and looking to the right, and there's just nothing there. It was kind of weird. But you know what? That was, if for any fans who were there,
Yeah.
that's a kind of a snapshot, once in a lifetime thing, right? Kind of like, all right, this is the current state of Beaver Stadium. Next time you're
Yeah.
in Beaver Stadium in the fall, it's not going to look like that. So very, very interested to see what it ultimately looks like, Bob, and where our vantage point is going to be, for the fall.
It's not only the Beaver Stadium. It's not only Beaver Stadium that's being renovated. There's some renovation going on in the wideout room. Johnny, do you see what I did there with that segue? Pretty good. It's a pretty great way to end the podcast. And you and Max are going to be on, I think, Thursday. Hopefully with some more details. I know Max takes some great notes, so I'm really excited. I know you are as well. I'm excited to hear what he has to say, and because when he watches practice, man, he takes. I think the word is copious. He takes copious, detailed notes. So I think the fans, you're going to want to hear what Max has to say Thursday. But Johnny, let's wrap this up. Good seeing you. The weather, it's not as windy now today. It's kind of warm. I'm pretty excited about that. It was cold up at State College on Saturday, but it's nice now. Hopefully it'll be nicer weather as we get closer to May and June. And before you know it, we're going to be in our new seats, Johnny, at Beaver Stadium. We just have no idea where they're going to be.
Up the Reds, Bob. Liverpool.